will call this meeting to order. It may be a long meeting.
Yes, thank you, Linda Diane.
All right.
I will now call the roll. I have received regrets from the following commissioners who are not able to join us this evening: Commissioner Lernahan, Commissioner Parsons, and Councilmember Griswold. I will now call roll. Please say here when your name is called. Commissioner Boland?
Here.
Commissioner Felt?
Here.
Commissioner Hull?
Here.
Commissioner Kleinman?
Here.
Commissioner Sanderson?
Here.
Commissioner Summers?
Yeah.
Commissioner Woods?
Here.
Sergeant Bill Clock?
Here.
Commissioner Dolan?
Here.
Commissioner Hess?
Here.
Commissioner Lazarus?
Here.
Commissioner Margolis?
Here.
Commissioner Webb? We have a quorum.
Thank you. Any, if you want to approve the consent agenda unless there's an objection? So I'll take a motion to do that. That would be the minutes in the agenda.
So moved.
Okay, and seconded by, right? All those in-
Kleinman?
All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? We have unanimous consent and we have an agenda. Next, we have the public comment. And now I see just one person out there. You're going to, no comment tonight? All right. And we will start without that. Going into business, we have the policy agenda input, which there's a revised copy of that Kayla distributed before the meeting to your desktop there. We actually need a approval of this to send it on to City Council for that portion of their agenda. So let's see if there's any discussion to start with. The first item is the late edition that was not in your packet. Yes.
So just, I'm guilty, first of all, of not contributing to this, but one thing that I noticed about it is it's about half advocacy items. We're advocating with the state legislature, which I think is very important. But I just wondered if there were more sort of local action things that we ought to add. I very much appreciate these new clean energy suggestions.
Do you have any local action items you'd like to add?
I wonder about stronger enforcement of the existing speed laws, things like speed laws, not blocking bike lanes, things like that, I feel don't get enforced as much as they should. Would we want to have an issue about enforcement?
Okay. I think when it comes to speed laws, I personally would suggest that we take any and all actions possible to reduce speeds and not just enforcement.
Yeah,
Um,
granted, I agree.
That's what I was thinking about this afternoon again.
Yeah. So maybe,
We could
And we-
trust Kayla to draft such a inclusion.
do we want to refer to the speed reduction plan that was developed a couple years ago?
Sure.
Yeah, maybe.
Is that agreeable to us?
So I'd likely add a statement about, I think the way that Julie framed it, any and all action, or maybe it was Diane, any and all action to enforce and reduce speeds, and specifically pertaining to implementation of the Transportation Commission's Speed Reduction Committee report. Something along those
Excellent.
lines.
I like that very much.
Okay.
And she mentioned blocking bike lanes to, every day on Facebook, social media, you see something when somebody snaps a picture of, trash barrel, whatever, traffic pylon in the bike lane.
And the new delivery systems that we have in town being a prime offender.
So in that case, do you want to add a similar statement about action to enforce maintaining a clear bike lane?
Yeah, just when the, just blatant,
To try on your mic.
getting, and just like trash pickup days and whatnot, and just, you have to dodge out into traffic to get around them, and, yeah, when we've already got so many things that we have to keep track of as biking, that, trash barrel, or even a traffic control pylon that's been left in the bike lane is just a little annoying, I guess. I don't know how to put it, and dangerous.
Right.
Okay. And did you have other?
No.
I question including the, what was the first point and is now the second, which is to advocate for landing ramps to be included in the definition of crosswalks for the proposed statewide ordinance. As a commission, we've already come out against this ordinance, and it's the end of November, and that if it is continued, it will be under a different bill number in 2 months. But also, I don't know that we should be trying to prove on something which we oppose in totality.
Well, I'm just wondering, because I feel like that's a reasonable thing. I mean, if we were to have a crosswalk law that was statewide, it would be good if it actually included the curb. It would be effectively like similar to what we have now, but it would be a statewide thing rather than an Ann Arbor only thing. I see that as an improvement, and I feel like, yeah, it may be under a different bill number, but I'm guessing that people will continue to pursue this. And I know that the city, I saw a letter from the city that actually said they endorse HB 473A, and that actually was news to me, but because I know the city passed something about a statewide crosswalk ordinance, but I saw letters that were sent out by the city administrator to our legislators saying we should pass HB 473A.
You mean sent it by Howard?
Yeah. I saw that it was like dated October 21st.
I think if you read what's in the letter, it says we support a statewide ordinance or a statute. I don't think it's specific
I
as
thought it
to the
said-
content.
I thought it said 47, it listed that House bill number though.
It references it, but the language of the letter reflects what council advised, which is support for a statewide statute. I think it's relatively silent on the content of what's in the statute.
And I can send a copy of those materials to the commission tomorrow.
The
So-
council passed support for statewide crosswalk statute. And that's what we notified. We didn't talk about specifically what's in the statute.
I think I agree with Tim, but as far as overall policy statements, I think that our disagreement with this bill is of greater importance than beginning to comment on the specifics of it, which is still an option for any time during the next year.
So council gave direction to the administrator to notify our legislature of support for for a statewide standard. I think if the commission has concerns, that's something you can address separately.
Yeah.
So would it meet everybody's goals if we just removed Michigan House Bill 4738 from the second bullet point?
I still think it's a slight reversal, that it's a little bit odd to be specifically advocating for some part of this if we're not also advocating for the larger aspect, which could be either, we do agree that there should be statewide consistency, or that we're continuing to be opposed to a statewide bill which takes away any of the authority of the Ann Arbor ordinance.
I guess I'm kind of confused about what landing ramps means. So in Ann Arbor, if a pedestrian is sort of standing waiting to enter the crosswalk, then the drivers have to yield. But does that mean they're standing in the landing ramp? That's what I'm confused about.
Yeah, the landing ramps are like the curbs that like they have there, like
With
with
the
like-
bumps on them?
Yeah,
So is that where a pedestrian is standing when they're waiting to cross, or?
yeah, that's what that would entail, defining that as part of the crosswalk for the purposes of this law.
Which may be a great idea. I'm just questioning putting it here.
Okay.
I feel like it's because right now, city council is advocating for this law. I mean, maybe they're not advocating for the exact version that is now, but they're pushing for something. And if they're gonna push for something, I would like to make it clear that if there is to be a statewide law, it should include these provisions.
Yeah, I thought, my sense was that our objection to a statewide law was that we would object if it were to supersede Ann Arbor's law in a situation where it was not as protective of pedestrians as our law, but that it wasn't that we were blanket opposed to a statewide crosswalk law. So I think, yeah, I guess I'm just not sure where the nuance would be in this document. I'm not sure if we have consensus about how we feel about a statewide crosswalk law in general. Yeah, I guess those are points of confusion.
But Ann Arbor is not the only one affected, because there are other cities now that have adopted laws that would be made questionable under the statewide, the current proposed statewide ordinance. So, yes. We're
So-
very clear that we're opposed to this particular bill.
So, but would we want to advocate for a statewide bill that looked more like what we might want from a statewide bill? And would that make sense to go in here?
We haven't made that decision.
And so I think then the question is, are you prepared to do that as part of these policy recommendations? Or do you want to, would it incorporate the concerns if you framed it more as a hypothetical? If a statewide crosswalk law moves forward, then advocate for landing ramps to be included as part of the crosswalk definition? So not necessarily saying that you're, because I understand, I think what Lena Diane's point is, it contradicts the action that the commission has already taken, which was the statement against that specific House bill.
I think we can oppose a current bill at the same point as saying, if this is to proceed, we want changes. I mean, we opposed it as it was. I mean, yeah, it just,
Wendy,
Yeah, just a question, because I don't believe I was on the commission when
that's right.
this discussion took place, but I just wanted to be clear. It sounds as if there is a consensus that we would be in favor of including the landing ramps, et cetera, in terms of a statewide crosswalk ordinance, but we are concerned that a state ordinance might be less strenuous than what we have in Ann Arbor at this point. And so, like probably a lot of ordinances, we don't want the state's ordinance to supersede what Ann Arbor is doing, and therefore, we're not able to enforce what we want as a locality. Is that my reading? Is that
Yes,
kind of what
because
it
the city attorney pretty much said, we have no idea what would happen
is? Mhm.
if it's passed.
All right. So if there was some way to possibly indicate that, just that we are certainly advocating and in favor of the landing ramps, which I certainly would be in favor of, if it's appropriate to put it in this sort of a document, and perhaps in another line, not trying to add to what you already have here, just that, again, the sense of the Transportation Commission is that we would encourage that, I don't know if it's that our legislators, however we want to word it, and maybe the city attorney will say you can't really say that, but that we certainly would not want anything that's less strenuous than we as a municipality are passing for our citizens. And I have no idea how you put that in there, or even if that's capturing what we want, but I think that does seem to be what we're really hoping for.
My concern is the placement, that these are all ideas which are worth considering. But I think this particular document is not the place to begin to specify what we would change in the proposed bill, but also that level of, we're talking about sort of larger policies at this point, and particularly since we haven't gone over this as a commission at all. And I know that there are things that I would add and subtract from even that particular statement, since there are plenty of curbs which don't have ramps,
Right.
that are still crosswalks, and so why one and not the other, and so without the time to actually sort of more fully stretch this out and put in the rest of the stuff that we would want, I don't think it belongs in this document. But it does belong as important information to be considered still.
And may I just ask, this document, and I think many of us felt as if it was relatively new, but I guess it is something that city council has been asking for.
Mm-hmm.
But it seems like this is the first time there's a lot of discussion among the commissions about it as we attempt to send it forward. But this is more or less an in-house document for council to get a sense of where the various commissions are, is that?
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah,
Howard?
So the policy agenda, though, is adopted by council simultaneously with the annual budget, and we do share the city's policy agenda with our state representatives. So if there are concerns about specific items in the bill as it exists in the House or Senate, it would be appropriate for the commission to comment on that. I was not being evasive before. What I was relaying to you was that there is support by council for a statewide statute that makes enforcement more meaningful and easier. But there are parts of that statute that you may want to weigh in on, specifically if the statute includes by definition ramps. All of our crosswalks have ramps for ADA compliance, so that may get you to where you want to be. There are also aspects of that bill that talk about both two-lane and four-lane divided highways that you may want to also provide some guidance on.
But that can be done even if it's not included in this policy
I
statement.
think you can forward your concerns. We will gather all the input that we have and Mr. Fournier, the Assistant City Administrator, will formulate any changes to the policy, and that'll go forward. And it'll be adopted with the budget, so there is some time.
How much time?
We'll forward the policy agenda for council approval probably in May. The other concern though is we don't control the time frame for when the House or Senate takes things up. So you should, anything that's important you should do as expeditiously as you feel prudent.
So we had a deadline sometime in December that was from the Boards and Commissions Coordinator asking that all commissions provide their feedback. So it sounds like there's a little more time between then and council actually taking action, but I think it's wanting to stay ahead of it and get everything organized and
The reason
provide.
for doing it now is if there's anything in any of the commission's input that could affect the FY21 budget or the CIP documents, it's good to get those in now. Sorry to interrupt.
So a statement saying that we would want to be involved in any actions on crosswalk laws at the state level would be broad enough to encompass this, plus any changes that we make between now and May or whatever, without being as specific. And so I would lean more towards being vague and filling in the details later. But if I'm the only one who feels that way, that's,
I think that makes sense to take away some of the specificity, but just plan to weigh in with more details at a future
because we
meeting.
definitely care a lot.
Right.
I know that.
Yes.
Yeah, and I'd like us to have a more detailed statement than just, we don't like this law. I want us to actually say what we don't like about this law and how it might be changed, yeah.
But it sounds like that's going to require more conversation, more discussion.
Yes, and we did have a couple of statements from some commissioners about why we don't like the law. But they can also be expanded upon. Would that work as a compromise for now? I'm being a bit pushy here, but we're going to need that to get through tonight, so.
So the
Okay.
statement, if we were to strike the second bullet point about advocating to the specific language about the crosswalk definition and replace with a statement that the Transportation Commission requests to be involved in the development of crosswalk laws at the state level, or I don't know that development is the right word, that's what I think I heard.
I mean, we're not going to be involved in the state House or state Senate drafting process. I mean,
But you want to contribute, you want to provide feedback to city council?
Right,
For
so
their
advocate-
consideration in support or opposition of a future statewide crosswalk law?
Right, so participation in any advocacy plan regarding statewide crosswalk laws. Is that,
That's within our realm of responsibility. What do you think, Tim?
okay, yeah.
Okay, so we have those changes. Are there any other comments or changes suggested? Okay, then I'll take a motion to accept this as amended,
so moved?
trusting Kayla with the final language, but we can tell that she's on the right track here. Okay, so it moved?
Yeah, so moved.
Molly,
Yep.
seconded by Wendy. Ready to vote? All those in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? Thank you. That worked. All right.
Next is, Howard, did you want to present about the staff response on the resolution directing review of the transportation planning and operation management? The memo was provided in the commission material, so I've got it here pulled up on screen, and if there's anything that you want to discuss, either you or Raymond, we can do that, or go into commissioner questions.
If I could just a couple minutes just to kind of frame the discussion a little bit. The memorandum is provided in response to a council resolution that expressed concern about the 3 points that are shown. One is how the city uses its transportation resources to achieve safe and efficient movement of all modes of travel. The second was to do sort of an assessment of our pedestrian and cycling environment. And it says before December 31st, but we're not going to be able to do that. One of the attachments to the memo is a proposal from Sam Schwartz. And because this is additional work, and because we're amending a contract that's already over my contracting authority, I have to bring it back to council for approval. So our intent is to have the change to the contract before council in December, and then the effort to accomplish the scope of work should be able to be done pretty quickly. The other attachment is an organization chart that shows essentially the allocation of resources and then the reporting chain. The third bullet is for us to consolidate the information we provide into a single quarterly report so that it's easier to pull the pieces together. We already provide to the Transportation Commission through Raymond's update a status on ongoing efforts. We also report to council on pedestrian accidents. So what we'd like to do is pull that together so that there's one document and people don't have to go searching for information. So the resolution from council asks that we send this through the Transportation Commission for your input and for any feedback that you might like to offer. And my intent is to capture those comments and then integrate them into the final memo that I'll send to council.
All right. So any particular comments or discussion? There's one piece that I've talked with Raymond a couple of times now about, which is he asked me about the monthly transportation updates that we get. And the suggestion is that those be slightly changed so that they focus on a quarterly reporting system, but that we get some kind of minor, lesser reports in between, but not give up the monthly reports that we have been getting that are so valuable.
I don't know that providing a quarterly report prevents us from providing a monthly report.
Right.
So we can still do both.
But that it could be a smaller version,
Okay.
if that was helpful, which he indicated it would be.
Yeah, so I think, if I may, what I suspect will happen is, starting in January, you'll see probably a change to our monthly report whereby we'll highlight the verbal thing that I normally do is highlight the changes. That will probably be the report. It won't kind of include this language that carries over from month to month. It'll really just be what's changed. And then that way, that'll be easier for us to roll into the quarterly report. So we'll give it a try in January, see if you like it. If you think it's a little porridge too hot, porridge too cold, we'll go back to the way it was. But if you do like the way we're headed with it and it's a more truncated version, Cliff Notes version, we can continue in that direction.
Any other comments or suggestions? Did you have
Thank
any
you.
questions to ask us that might facilitate that, or is that okay, Howard?
We're in the process, last year council authorized us to purchase a software package called Yellowfin that allows us to draw data from different places. And as we've implemented that, we've come up with some very good reporting mechanisms that access different databases where information is stored. I've always maintained that software doesn't solve your problems, it highlights them. So one of the things that it's highlighted is that we need to have a better system to capture project data so that we can use the power of software to ease the burden on staff, but we have to do the data capture and entry into a system. So I think as we continue to go down that path, the report will become more standardized, easier to populate. So that's a long-term vision.
Okay. Great, then I guess we'll consider this item done. Complete, thank you. And the next item is the calendar of meeting dates.
So this is the proposed 2020 calendar. It consistently shows the Transportation Commission meeting on the third Wednesday, which is our routine meeting date. In the past, we've had a few adjustments due to holidays, but we don't have any holiday conflicts in 2020. One thing particularly that Wendy might notice is that February 19th, Planning Commission currently has a meeting scheduled, but is looking for an alternate date to move to. So this is something that we're still working out, because when there are holidays that fall on Mondays, like Martin Luther King Day, President's Day, then City Council moves to a Tuesday, which then impacts Planning Commission, and traditionally they had moved to Wednesday. And we've agreed that with the development of a new commission, that we will observe routine meeting days as much as possible, so that for commissioner schedules and for the public who expects to be able to find the Transportation Commission on the third Wednesday. So I would recommend that we consider this calendar with the understanding that the February date is contingent on Planning Commission finding an alternate date for that
Okay.
meeting.
And so we will actually want a motion to accept these as our meeting days.
So moved.
Okay, and Wendy, and seconded by Jim. Any other discussion? And those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? We have our meetings for next month, for next year, 2020. Great. Then Steve is up next on our agenda for an informational presentation. So we have 20 minutes for this.
Use the arrow keys to advance. Forward.
Good evening, Transportation Commission. I'm Steve Dolan from the University of Michigan. I'm the Director of Operations for our Transportation, Parking, and Logistics Operations. With me tonight is Sue Gott from our Planning Department. I think it was about 3 or 4 Transportation Commission meetings previous. The Commission asked the university to come and do an update on land use planning and our parking and transportation systems. And Sue is the planner, so she's going to introduce herself and give you an update from a planning perspective on land use. And then I will talk a little bit about our transportation and parking operations.
Good evening. Thank you for having us. Steve said I'm the campus planner for U of M and oversee master planning, site planning. And today we're talking a little bit about land use. Given the time constraints, we're keeping it kind of high level, but we'll save a couple minutes at the end for questions. So a few facts just to kind of give you a little orientation. U of M has about 3,000 acres in the Ann Arbor area and about 36.5 million gross square feet. We have about 46,000 students and about 49,000 faculty and staff. We have a number of trips to the hospital every year, trips to our athletic departments, so as you can imagine, we have a lot going on. What I thought I'd do is just kind of run through each of our campuses and talk about land use on our campuses to kind of give you a little bit more specifics. So I'm going to take them in order, starting with our Ross Athletic Campus. That campus is about 350 acres and about 2.5 million gross square feet. So that campus is generally prioritized for our athletic uses as well as recreation, but we do have a number of support functions that are also included on that campus. Our central campus, as you know, is our historic core. It is really fairly built out. There's very little area left for expansion on that campus. It's about 350 acres and about 14 million gross square feet. So it's quite a dense campus. And it's what we consider to be our academic core in terms of land use. So we have a combination of academic facilities, research facilities, a number of residential halls. And when we think about the relationship of parking and transportation relative to land use, we really look to prioritize uses other than continued additional parking structures in the central core. We tend to look more at locating future parking if and as it is needed, more on the perimeter of the academic core, and to look for transit and other means of mobility to bring people into the core. Our medical center is our most densely developed campus. It's 100 acres, but we have about 10 million gross square feet of space. So as you probably know, that's where our clinical mission is located, both our hospitals and our medical school. And then we do have Wall Street area, which is a support land use area to the very high acuity care that occurs in the core of the medical center campus. Our largest campus is North Campus. It's about 1,000 acres, but today only about 8 million gross square feet. So we really look to North Campus as the area of future growth for the university. It's a combination of academic, research, and student life again, but we have a number of areas and opportunities for redevelopment. We've talked, in fact, with City Council in September about the opportunities for some of the future redevelopment of our housing facilities, particularly south of Plymouth Road, and how we might be able to densify those areas to use that land more efficiently. And then finally, our fifth campus is East Medical Campus. That is about 200 acres and only 500,000 gross square feet generally. It's also reserved for our clinical mission, but primarily it serves outpatient needs. So again, from a trip generation standpoint, those who are coming to clinics for procedures that can be performed outpatient can get off 23, go to those facilities and leave within several hours, versus those who are coming for overnight stays are at our medical center.
So what I'd like to talk a little bit now is more about our transportation and our parking system, because that's what you asked me specifically to talk about. So from a high-level overview, we have about 29,000 parking spaces in our parking system. That consists of 16 parking structures, 100, feels like 16,000. 100 surface lots, and then there's the docks and service centers associated with a lot of our buildings. We also have over 8,000 bike parking spots. So if you look at the inventory, we talk about 29,000 parking spaces, but those are not all parking spaces for our faculty, staff, and students. Of those 29,000, there's about 21,000 permitted parking spaces that our faculty, staff, and students can use. You can see from the table, many are patients and visitors, valet associated with the hospital. I'd like to call out, there's quite a few parking ride type of parking spots out at the periphery that's connected with the transit system, and then some other business vehicle, service vehicle kind of parking that's necessary to keep facilities running on the campus. And then that last one, I'd like to call out the 1,400 parking spaces in the category of other. And in that category, that many of those spaces are things like Zipcar and Maven, van pool spaces, a lot of the activity that we try to drive alternative transportation and have a place for those people who come in a more dense way in a van pool, car sharing, those kind of things. And that parking is so we have to provide less on campus. One other thing I'd like to note there is student parking. If you notice in the table under active permits, we do not have a lot of student parking permits. So Sue mentioned the numbers, 46,000 students. There's only about 3,000 permits for students. Mostly it's upperclassmen and graduate students, but we do not park a lot of students on our campus. So we like to look at our parking system with a balanced approach. We know that we have to have parking in the core around some of our campuses, but what we really try to do is utilize our transit system and park quite a few people out at the periphery. We encourage all kinds of other park and ride options as well. So what this kind of graphic shows you is that this is really related to the health system, but we do have, as Sue mentioned, how densely populated that is and how busy it is. We try to keep as much traffic out of that area as possible, so we try to influence a lot of parking out at the core, or out at the periphery. So when we talk about that approach, I like to also highlight the fact that only about 20, or over 20% of our faculty and staff come some different way other than driving their single occupancy vehicle. So we think that from an industry standard, that's probably pretty good. If you think about most companies and most large organizations, if over 20% find other ways to come, that's pretty good. But you can also see on this map, what the red shows you is that our peak parking time is that there is no or very little vacancy in those parking areas. So in the areas closest to core, there's very little parking, but on the edges, on the northeast and south end, you'll see more parking, and that's where we try to influence more people to park in those areas, keeping them out of the core and using our transit system to get them into campus. So if you look at this, and this graphic shows kind of how all of our bus routes connect these areas. Our bus system is very busy. We do over 8 million passenger trips a year on our buses. So that's just the U of M Blue buses. We also do about 2.5 million passenger trips a year on AAATA's system. So again, it's ways to get people to use other options. So if you notice the map, those are all the different bus routes, and those are multiple routes, but they connect all the activity nodes on campus as well as the remote parking areas. I'd like to draw your attention to the area between North Campus and the medical campus. You'll notice how that is a thicker red line because that's where all the bus routes run through. And that is a very, very busy corridor. We do about 35,000 passenger trips a day in that corridor. And it's busy and it slows things down. So that's important in the future. So again, overview of the transit service. As I mentioned, we do about 8 million passenger trips a year. We have a very busy paratransit service. We charter many buses. Safe transportation is very important for our faculty, staff, and students. We have after-hours safe ride services. Bio-research shuttle is another service we do from a safety perspective. That's to get bio-research samples off the buses. So we run specific vehicles, so we're not mixing passengers with bio-research on the buses. So we have specific buses, they're really small vans for that. For those trips. And the other thing, we do coordinate pretty well with AAATA. We have, on our Central Campus Transit Center, was a coordinated effort between AAATA and the university to build that transit center. There's over 800 buses that go through that transit center a day, 800 buses stopping in there. Very busy area, lots of transfers. It's quite an active system. So again, I want to talk a little bit more about some of the transit options. I mentioned all of our university faculty, staff, and students can ride the AAATA bus service. That's free to our faculty, staff, and students, but we pay for it out of my parking budget. So it's 2.5 million trips a year, and the reason we pay for it for parking is because we'd rather have them using the buses than driving their vehicles to campus. So we think it makes sense to use our parking revenues to support alternative transportation. Again, I put on here, it's about 40% of the AAATA trips on an annual basis, so we do use that service quite well. We also have a lot of park and ride locations. We've really just expanded them more recently, kind of out at the Ann Arbor, East Ann Arbor area. We are parking about 400 people a day that are using a different park and ride service, and that's even separate from the buses. And we have many other alternative programs like bike program, motorcycle, moped parking. We are also working with Raymond and the city and the e-scooters and the spin scooters that are in town. We're piloting those for a year to see how that goes. And then emergency ride home, I highlight that because to influence people to use alternatives and not drive their cars, sometimes people have emergencies and need to get home. So 6 times a year, they can take a cab to get home if they have an emergency, and we pay for that from our parking system.
I've worked with you for 14 years.
Learn
It's
something
really
new.
well used, I got to tell you. Here I just kind of, again, going back to the bus service and showing the operating areas, I wanted to emphasize that we connect all the different nodes of the campus. Safety is super important. This is a snapshot from our AVL, which is the automatic vehicle locator on the buses. So you can see where your bus is, you can plan your trip out to the stop, you know the next arrival and the ETA of the bus, so you can use the system more effectively. And this last is a rendering of a new parking structure. You may have seen it being built. It's under construction right now. We just started erecting precast this past couple weeks. And so this will be a new parking structure. It's long been in a plan with the university. But earlier I mentioned a blended approach. So we try to use the core, or we try to use the periphery to bring people in. This is on the Lower Town area by Kellogg. And again, it's a blended approach. So I highlight that because I'm going to give you a couple metrics. In 2005, the university's total faculty, staff, and students was roughly 70,000 when you take students, faculty, and staff. Today, Sue just mentioned, we're at 46,000 students. Did I get that right? 46,000 students, 47,000 faculty, staff. So we're up over 90,000 combined. And in that time, we've really only added about 7,000 parking spaces. So for the growth of 20,000 faculty, staff, and students, about 7,000 parking spaces and about 6,000 permits. What it tells you is that we've really grown our alternative transportation network and people using something other than bringing their car to campus. And lastly, for my portion, before I turn it back to Sue for one more slide, is just a note about transportation. Our system's really grown. We really want to look at ways that we can do things differently, different types of vehicles, articulated buses where we can get more people in one trip. Electric buses are things that's on our radar. To do that, we need a system or we need a facility to be able to maintain those. We've outgrown our facility that's currently down on South Campus by the football field. So we have plans to move on our new facility, a new maintenance facility for our buses, operations and maintenance, up on North Campus where the laundry building currently resides for the hospital. That will be, they'll be finished using that in about another year. We intend to demolish that and hopefully build a new transportation facility to be able to maintain our buses into the future. That's what I have.
So you reminded me of a little history when you mentioned 2005. We issued our medical center and East Medical Campus master plans in 2005. And at that time, we first introduced the nomenclature of transit centers, because it was in that master plan that we decided we were not going to keep building more parking at the medical center, and that we would begin transitioning to being more dependent on transit. Then in 2008, when we issued our North Campus master plan, we introduced a high-capacity corridor in our planning, and that was reinforced with the city working with Mr. Cooper and a number of other city folks as an outcome of the model of mobility to imagine a higher capacity corridor that could run through campus and the community that would also contribute to moving people in an alternative means other than the private automobile. It was reinforced again in 2010 when we jointly conducted with the city, the DDA, AAATA, Transportation Technology Forum. And then we worked on the connector for a number of years and have of late been looking at how can we make it more affordable. In 2016, we concluded that light rail system was probably one of the better modes, but it was probably a little bit outside of our collective price range. That doesn't mean that the need has gone away. And so the university's been continuing to look at what this system could look like to try to move people more efficiently, more effectively, with greater sustainability, a higher degree of reliability between our campuses. And it's something that we're really closely continuing to evaluate today. At the same time, as Steve mentioned, bringing people from outside, we've also looked from a land use standpoint, what are some of the activities that can be moved off our core areas? So for those of you who may be more familiar with our health systems business model, we've actually built a new facility for outpatient care in Brighton. We've also built another outpatient facility on the west side of Ann Arbor. Those are almost like transportation demand management strategies to help relocate community trips back out into the community, take that demand away from the core of the medical center to, again, try to help free up land, use our medical center gross square footage for our highest acuity care. So there's really a number of strategies that we try to use to balance land use with different creative approaches to mobility and to strategies that can help continue to look at alternatives in lieu of adding more parking. That's the conclusion of our presentation. If you want to take a few minutes for questions, or if we're short of time,
Thank you.
you're welcome.
Yeah, questions, comments, discussion? Tim?
Yeah, so I know you're talking a lot about like how you want to get more people on transit and everything, and how you're looking at this, like, the study about it was the connector study. And
Right.
one question I have is, have you had discussions with AAATA? Because I feel like, actually, as someone who commuted to campus and used to work on North Campus, feels like North Campus is very underserved. It's not underserved as far as blue buses. There's tons of them going through. But as far as AAATA trying to get to North Campus from off campus, even the nearby areas, it's infrequent and you have to make a lot of connections, and it just becomes a lot less convenient. And I suspect, I don't know the numbers, that a lot more North Campus workers drive. And I just given the way it is, the fact that you're having to ride buses, either make like 2 connections or ride a bus that goes once every half hour on peak. I'm wondering if you've had discussions with them about like reconfiguring the bus routes. I know you contribute a lot of money in the way of the M-Ride program, so you might have some influence there. Or perhaps shifting some of your service to theirs so it can go outside the university and pick up rides. Because right now, yeah, it seems like you have lots of frequent service on North Campus, but none that leaves North Campus or leaves the campus.
I'd be happy to answer. Tim, feel free to jump in if there's anything you'd like to add, but
Be my guest.
so the answer is, I don't know that you're right about more people drive to North Campus than Central Campus. Quite honestly, I don't think the data shows that, but I think you're right. Depending where you're coming from, there might be less AAATA buses than there is coming into the core of Ann Arbor. So some of that's just by the nature of the way the system is set up. But I do think that we have the ability, we work together all the time, and we can continue to explore those kind of things. We probably have ways to look at that data a little bit better, and I think it's something that's easily discussed. But we work with Tim and his team very frequently.
Yeah, because I look at like, yeah, you have North Campus and then you have immediate outskirts of North Campus. It's like you have frequent bus service on Plymouth Road, but it doesn't go into the main North Campus. And like, you have all this housing around like Green Road, Nixon Road, those kinds of areas, and the buses that go to North Campus are infrequent. So it's just, that's kind of the one thing that, yeah, but you look at AAATA, and they have frequent service that goes to Central Campus and Medical Campus, and even some to South Campus, but not North.
Okay.
I have 2 questions. Thank you so much for this presentation. It was really great to hear about the ways that you're trying to redirect parking out to the outside of campus. I'm wondering, in addition to the infrastructure approaches you've taken, if the university is looking at adjusting the incentives. So, for example, most of these parking passes are monthly passes. If people are only able to pay on a daily basis, then every time they park, they're paying for it. And once they pay for their monthly pass, it's like, I might as well drive as much as possible because I've paid for it. And so I'm wondering if you're looking at those kinds of adjustments in addition to the infrastructure adjustments.
There's a couple things going on with that right now, and some of them are just getting kicked off. Part of it, there's the President's Carbon Neutrality Commission, and there is some effort around mobility. And it's just kicking off, and some of that is in the discussion. And we have actually started to explore it more from a conversation with medical campus and the growth that's going on there, and how we handle that. So, yeah, it's definitely something that's in the discussion.
That's great to hear. And I have another question, which is about, and this is another collaboration with AAATA question, but have there been any attempts to combine maps and schedules in such a way that a rider who's doing part of their commute on a city bus and part on a campus bus can easily visualize their whole trip without having to jump between systems?
You can actually do it now in Google Transit.
But it's not real time. I think Google Transit is not real time.
Oh, as far as looking
Tracking.
at connections and those kind of things?
Yeah, you can't look at live buses in the same system. It's
Yeah.
like, because, yeah, you can only look at live U of M buses in Magic Bus, and then like Google's like thing and stuff, other sites for AAATA.
Yeah, for planning purposes. But as far as the live data, we operate on 2 separate systems for our AVL. Quite honestly, we're just not integrated that way. Could it be something we explore? Sure.
Thanks.
Yeah.
I have a quick one. So, talking about all the technology that you need, huge thing to move people, I'm just wondering if the the transit corridor could be made more robust for more, human scale transportation, like the scooters, bike, e-bike, and whether or not you could directly incentivize people for using those modes of transportation somehow. Maybe every 10 times they come in, they get a free parking pass, so they can drive when it rains. But having, feeling safe while you're moving on the road on a small vehicle, a scooter, and a bike, when you have, actually buses are the things I feel the most when I'm out riding. And if you can make a transportation corridor more robust for those, and actually riding a bike is probably quicker than a bus for most people.
Yeah. So you should probably take that one comment before you do, as I would say, I think you mentioned some transit corridors that are really busy and making the infrastructure better for bikes. And that's definitely something that Sue and I think about when we talk about high-capacity corridor between campuses. I think we are being very considerate of that kind of infrastructure.
Yeah, I mean, really, I think this whole connector idea is intended to be incredibly robust and to really try to be creative with different technology that can just help get people out of their cars and have much greater frequency. So I think what you're talking about is coming. It's just a very detailed planning process. And, but I think we share, the interest in trying to achieve a vision of much more robust mobility outside of our cars.
Right.
One last piece I'd add to that too is, and I think you're going to hear from Eli and their transportation plan going forward, and a lot of it's about infrastructure. And we do try to coordinate very closely with our partners in the city when we talk about infrastructure for on campus and in the community for peds and bikes.
Bike lanes, right, whenever we're doing a project, for example, we'd always be coordinating if we're redoing a road or working next to a road. Many of the bike lanes have been U of M projects where we've added bike lanes on Ann Street, North University by the Transit Center, the new Palmer Bikeway. So we share a desire to have a more robust system for pedestrians and for cyclists.
Okay.
So we'll move it over time, if there's any urgent questions. The Palmer Bikeway is not something I've heard of before.
We built it maybe 12 years ago. There was no good mobility route if you're on the east side of Washtenaw between Getty's and Xena Pitcher. And so when the intersection was built for the Life Sciences Complex and the new Palmer Drive, shortly after that, we built a new north-south bikeway on the east side of Washtenaw that sits in Palmer Field. And that provides a new route
Okay.
to be able to get off Washtenaw if you don't want to be in the street. And you can ride up on the west side of the field and have access up to Xena Pitcher.
Okay.
So
Just
that was a
never heard it
fairly big
named.
project because, yeah, it does have a name, well, because it's in Palmer Field. Right, but that was an important segment to help improve access along the east side of Washtenaw.
Great. Anything else?
Thank you so much for the opportunity. Very much appreciate being able to be with you tonight. Thank you.
It's great to hear the details. It's staggering numbers. All right, then we're going to talk about the Ann Arbor Public Schools. Always glad when you can make it to a meeting. Almost impossible, yes.
Thank you so much. Thanks very much. I have a quick update. It really contains sort of the summer and then in the beginnings of this fall, and I welcome questions as well. I wanted to just quickly go through the current Safe Route to School programs that we have in place. These programs include committees, groups at each school. Right now, we have 13 of 19 elementary schools have a Safe Route to School program. Both our K-8 schools, 4 of our 5 middle schools, and 2 of our 5 high schools have official Safe Route to School programs. And I would like to say that when we operate these programs, it's really in partnership with the City of Ann Arbor, including Officer Adkins, Sergeant Clock, as well as Raymond and his team. They really are integral to the success of these Safe Route to School teams. The committees from each of the schools are generally made up of principals, staff, parents, students at our high schools. And then, of course, as I mentioned before, we usually have a city traffic engineer and our police officer that also works with us. The first thing we do is we do an evaluation on site. We actually walk the site. Today, we were walking Burns Park. Yesterday morning, we were walking Burns Park. We try to do the on-campus as well as all the adjoining roadways and walk paths that come in. We work with the city to look at the engineering of the streets and the sidewalks that come into the schools. We also frequently work with OHM and bring traffic engineers onto our campuses to try to look at our traffic flow. And we've already made adjustments on many of our campuses based on OHM's assessments to improve our traffic flows on our campuses. Lots of education. We work with the Safe Route to School teams to incorporate a lot of programs. We have a whole Safe Route to School communication plan. We also use Safe Kids Huron Valley, which is out of Mott's Hospital, and they offer free programs, again, working with local law enforcement, and they come in and do presentations to all age groups of our students on how safe walk to school, being safe car riders. They take home lots of information that they share with their parents, and so we are expanding those free programs within our schools as well. Lots of encouragement, and these really are when our schools do bike and walk to school days, they hold special events, incentives for kids, and we are trying to expand those days so that they're not just in the fall and in the spring. We want our schools doing them every day, but we really are looking at a lot of schools doing them every Friday throughout the school year, and we don't want weather to be an impairment for these. We want them to really encourage kids walking and biking as safely as they can during all weather. October is a big month. That's the Safe Route to Schools Bike and Walk month. As an example, October, Wine School does Walktober. So they do special events throughout October for those types of programs. And then enforcement. We do work into enforcement sometimes. Sometimes we see behaviors that even with lots of education just aren't changing. And so we will work with local law enforcement and get a couple cars out there. And sometimes that's all it takes, is issuing a couple of warnings or some tickets when people are stopping over crosswalks. That's something that happens all the time near our schools, or making turns that are not allowed, especially in the crosswalk areas. So it's our last resort, but sometimes it is definitely important, and then sort of puts people on notice that what they're doing, they really need to look out around our schools. We have 3 grants right now that we've received from the state through the Michigan Fitness organization up at the state. A2 STEAM, as you may know, is involved in a long-term grant with the city. And while we haven't been able to do a few of the programs with the grant, some sidewalks that we were hoping to be able to work with the city, we're doing a lot over there. They are doing this year, they've got an enforcement decoy program, which is at the crosswalks, and Sergeant Clock could speak to that a little more as well. We are expanding our Orange Flag program, which started at Burns Park, and these are being put in a variety of areas around A2 STEAM. These are the flags that we put out and that kids use to wave as they cross, and a lot of them walking with their parents, but some not, and it's really good visibility for our students when they are at some of these crosswalks. They are developing a student video for one of their remote drop-off locations, which is at Bethel AME Church. This is a partnership with the church, and the students are putting together their own video, encouraging more cars to not come on campus, but to use this as a remote drop-off. We've installed a couple new bike racks on pads, and we're going to be involved. We've just been invited to participate with the Lower Town Initiative with the city, and so we'll be sitting down and talking with the city regarding those initiatives that are coming up. Mini grants are a great way for schools to get up to $5,000 that they use as incentives. And Lawton is continuing a mini grant. They've asked for a bit of an extension. And Burns Park and Dickin have grants this year. And we've already kicked off some bike and walk to school days at both these schools. We'll be doing a lot throughout the year, and then wrapping up those grants and those programs in the spring. Some of our other initiatives this year, and it's really important to note that these initiatives, many of them would not happen without our partnership with the city. And a lot of these things happened over the summer, the end of last year, and then moving into the fall. At Angel, the city, I should say, moved no parking to the south side of South University to allow us to do more drop-off and pickup space there. If you ever drive on Washtenaw in the mornings during drop-off, but even more so in the afternoons during pickup, it's one of my biggest fears. Cars are lined up along Washtenaw waiting to pull into the Angel lot there. It's a one-way coming in. So we're trying to pull more of those cars off Washtenaw and use South U as a drop-off and pickup. We also improved some on-site drop-off and pickup lanes as well to try to pull those cars quicker off of Washtenaw. BAW has done a very aggressive drop-off and pickup program on 5th Street, and it's worked really, really well. They produced a great video to show their families about the perils of dipping, cars dipping in and out of other cars, the dangers of that, and so that's worked very well. Carpenter, which is in Pittsfield Township, but we've done some new parking lot configurations there and separation of bus and car traffic. Pattongill, we improved some on-site crosswalks. Ann Arbor Open worked really well with the city on this one. The city put in a no left turn lane coming out of Red Oak onto Miller, and the school has done a great job at improving their drop-off and pickup. This is another school where we tend to get backups on Miller for about a 5 to 6 minute period in the mornings and afternoons, just as cars are pulling in. Scarlett, we're doing improvements on that property that also impact Mitchell as well. Those were done during the summer. Tappan, we did some improvements with the crosswalks in that front drop-off loop. And Huron, we continue to do education for the drop-off and pickup locations off of Fuller Road when we separated the bus and car traffic there. And this year, we've got Huron's Green Team promoting biking and walking and working with a group of students there to really help promote that throughout the year. They've done some pretty cool incentives for us there. M-City, I think I might have talked a little bit about this, but I wanted to just show it again because we're hoping this spring that we'll be moving some other schools will be able to access M-City. A2 STEAM did this last year, and it was a great thing. If you're not familiar with M-City, the kids were able to take their bikes and go to a whole bunch of different practice areas. We had stations. You'll see some of the photos here. Officer Martell was there, and it taught kids about how to navigate their bikes on railroad crossings, how to be a good pedestrian using the orange flags, and just really general rules of the road. We're really excited that Michigan allowed us to do this, and they've been open to allowing other schools to come in there and practice. So that was really nice use of sort of the town gown arrangement. Went through some of this. This is, again, just sort of a recap of our summer work this past year, and I've touched on a lot of these things already, but it's really important to note that this summer work is done with coordination with the city. A lot of these enhancements are done because of things that city agrees. We're putting up a lot more school zone signs throughout the city, which is so helpful for notice of our families and just general cars driving throughout the city, that they see these school zone signs, lots of flashing crosswalks. So it's been a great partnership for us to really do a lot in the past couple of years, improving our pedestrian travel as well as our drivers, our parents that drive in as well. I also wanted to just touch base on the program that we partner with the city, and that's our crossing guards. And the district pays for 50% of the crossing guards, and Officer Adkins runs this program. They are really vital throughout the city, and I will also say that it's really getting harder and harder to find crossing guards. So put a shout out there if anyone knows of anyone. There are a couple of jobs posted right now, but they are really, and they really are important to monitoring the traffic flow and creating safe gaps for our students. They are trained. They report any unsafe observations and incidents. They record and report license numbers of vehicles that disregard them when they are trying to cross students. And there's a program for both pedestrian and bike safety. We are working already on planning some summer work, some new exits and entrances at some of our schools, as well as some additional crossings. We will continue, as we did today, working with the city on looking at our school zone sign placements, as well as seeing what can be done within the neighborhoods where kids are walking and biking to school. We will continue our grant management, and we will go after some additional mini grants for next year. Those come up in March again. And we are improving some safety initiatives throughout our district. And so we will keep striving and looking to create safe walk and bike paths for our students, as well as encouraging less single vehicle traffic. I should mention that Ann Arbor Open has started a new carpooling program that I'm really hoping we can be able to do at many of our other schools as well, and trying to get more of those single vehicles off the road during the drop-off and pickup times. And that is it. So I know it's a quick rundown, but if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Comments and questions, yeah.
Hey, thank you. I find these updates really, really helpful. The school zone signs, are those the reduced speed signs, or those are just signs saying that you're in a school?
Yes, they're signs, because the school speeds are already 25 miles an hour. And it's sort of, we haven't had a lot of school zone signs. I'm really happy through Raymond that we've been able to put them up, because people just might not be aware that that is a known 25-mile-an-hour zone. So the school zone signs just help bring awareness when they enter those areas.
So I know maybe 2 years ago, some new school speed zone signs went up. And I just wondered, do all the schools have this speed zone, school speed sign posted now?
Not all of them. We're still working.
Yeah,
on-
so the one actually we need to look at is Miller for open. But typically, all of the schools that are, or actually just recently, we've upgraded all the schools that are on major roads that are posted above 25 miles per hour have the new flashing yellow sign that says, 25 miles per hour when lit. And so, these are the two high schools, Tappan. We also included the Michigan Islamic Academy, Central Academy. Because those are on arterials, right? Any of the neighborhood schools, we don't have the flashing sign because the posted speed limit of 25 miles per hour in the neighborhood is the same as the lowest speed we can post in a school zone, which is 25 miles per hour. What actually establishes the school zone in that case is the pedestrian crossing, the two children crossing. That actually establishes the school zone itself. We've talked with Liz in the past about, is there other signage that could be supplemented to kind of draw attention to the fact that that's a school zone? Some people may see that sign and think it's just a pedestrian crossing sign. It's not. It's actually different in the regulation in terms of what the signage means. But, in even coordinating with police department, are there opportunities for us to make sure that everybody understands that once you kind of enter that threshold, you're in the school zone? So we haven't solved for it yet, but it is some conversations we've had ongoing with both Liz and the police department on that.
And the current signs that are up have helped greatly.
Thank you so much for this, and thank you for all of the work that you do to keep our kids safe getting to and from school. I wanted to talk briefly about the crosswalk flags. I think that they are a really great idea in terms of increasing the visibility of our students, but I also really worry about putting the burden of pedestrian safety on our children. It seems like another awesome opportunity to say, if a child gets hit by a car, oh, well, were they holding a flag? Were they holding it high enough? It feels like a Band-Aid on a bigger problem. And I guess I would just love to see the schools periodically revisit the flag program, and that I would hope we would focus on sort of system-wide changes so that our kids are safer in the crosswalks without having to wave
Yeah.
a flag.
Right.
So just sort of, it's great that the program is growing right now, because I do agree that we need it, but I'd love to make sure that the schools keep checking in on whether we continue to need it.
Yeah. One of the things that I didn't mention is the education that goes with that. And it's just general around everywhere, like we do in this city, is stopping. You don't step off that curb until you make eye contact with the car, with the driver of the car, and the cars come to a complete stop. It's like our three big educations that especially our elementaries are doing. But I will tell you, some of our biggest offenders are our high schoolers, especially crossing here on Parkway. And so it's a big education program as well, so they go hand in hand with those. And at our elementaries where we put these flags in, there are many parents that are there as well. And the kids are waving the flags and the parents are walking across with them. So I see that happening a lot more than just individual students alone. And they're put at very high capacity, lots of kids areas, so we don't do them in isolated areas. But yeah, and they're within usual, well, A2 STEAMs is not within visual distance of the school, but there's adults assigned there. Thank you.
Yes.
Excuse me. Hi. I too want to thank you for coming and giving us the updates and everything. I first saw those flags when I was in Salt Lake City, and they actually use them throughout the city as people are crossing, and they leave them in a little basket or something on the other side of the street. And education goes along with it, because I haven't forgotten, and I certainly look for that whenever I'm in those areas. So I agree with you that we don't want to put the burden on the children, but on the other hand, I think it's probably even educating them that it's important to stop. And so every little bit helps, I guess. Thank you for letting us know that we need more crossing guards, and I have a suggestion about who you might reach out to. Many of our neighborhood associations have folks in them who are maybe home during the day at certain times who might be available, and I know the city maintains a list of neighborhood associations. That might be worth just putting it there on our city website as well. Then the other thing I was just thinking, do you know whether or not any cities or school systems might be thinking about using robots as crossing guards? Sounds a little different, but on the other hand, and maybe this is something our College of Engineering here could start to look at, but it seems like that might be a way of meeting the need we have, and just maybe it's a future kind of a thing to think about, but how might that actually work, and would that be a way of keeping everyone involved safe as well as keeping down the speeds? So,
That's
just a thought.
interesting, yeah. Yeah, we're also encouraging our lunchroom folks that, come to work. A lot of them work just the middle of the day, and this would be a good way, and so we're promoting it through Chartwell's, our food service company as well. But yeah, posting it on Nextdoor and the neighborhood associations, I'll talk with Officer Adkins about
Okay.
that.
Great, thank you.
One more quick thing. So I was really pleased to see you adding bike racks at the schools that you mentioned, and I hope you really continue doing that, because I know there still is need at some of the schools at Community and Ann Arbor Open. There's really a need for more bike racks, so I think that's important.
Yeah, for sure.
Anything else? All right, thank you
Thank you.
very much. And fresh from the downstairs open house, talking about the transportation plan. Maybe not fresh, but
Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the commission. My name is Eli Cooper. I'm the city's transportation program manager, and I have Stacy Meekins, the project manager from Sam Schwartz, for the Ann Arbor Moving Together Forward Towards Vision Zero. My job is to keep us or you on point as to time, so I'm going to turn over the presentation to Stacy. Thank you for the opportunity to present, and I'll be available for questions.
Thanks. Thanks to everyone for having me here tonight, and to most of you for coming to the open house tonight. It was a great turnout, and it was nice to see so many familiar faces. So just wanted to give you an update. No, it's not. Oh, it's back. It was at the end. Sorry. Just,
That was quick.
yeah, we're done. Okay, just back up is down and down is up right now. So we just wanted to give you an update on what we've been doing since last time we met here in September. And also kind of take a step back, because the first time I talked to you was back in January, and then I think not again until September. And so I think we lost the overview of Vision Zero between those two meetings, and so I wanted to take a step back and talk a little bit more about what is Vision Zero, and then what we've been doing since our last meeting. So this is directly from the website of the Vision Zero Network, which is a compilation of cities across the country that are focusing on Vision Zero. And they define it as both the goal and strategy to eliminate traffic fatalities and severe injuries among all road users, and to ensure safe, healthy, equitable mobility for all. And the reason I put this definition up here is because I really can't come up with a better one myself. I feel like the key points for me being it's both the goal and the strategy to eliminate traffic fatalities and severe injuries. Severe injuries meaning life-altering injuries. So it's the long-term vision of trying to get to that number of zero, but it's also the mindset of how to get there and the operations to do that. So where is Vision Zero being held up as the goal? You can see this map, the green dots grow every time I go to the website. And I just wanted to add on here the criteria that Vision Zero Network is looking for to get your city on the map. And so there are 4 criteria, and Ann Arbor has really checked off at least 2 of them, I believe. First being a clear goal of eliminating traffic fatalities and severe injuries, that the mayor has publicly, officially committed to Vision Zero. A Vision Zero plan or strategy is in place, which is what we are currently working on, and that key departments, including police, transportation, and public health, are engaged. I have reached out to the Vision Zero Network to see if they can provide a little bit more detail on what it takes to get on the map, and I'm still waiting to hear back. This is part of what I presented in January, and this is derived from the Vision Zero Network. It's kind of my interpretation of their wheel of what it takes to reach Vision Zero. And it's all these pie pieces that it takes to really have such a concerted effort that it would take to get to that number of zero. And trying to kind of decipher what all this means, to me it meant that the process has to be driven by inclusion and intention. Intention being that you have a very data-driven process, that you had, at the end of the day, have an action plan, that you know what steps you need to take to move forward, that you have a systems-based approach, so you're not just kind of chasing these one-off projects, but you have a broader strategy. And then in terms of inclusion, I think that applies to both the process that we're going through now, but also moving forward. And as you saw, I'll just go back a slide. Oh. That last bullet point here, that the key departments are all engaged, that needs to continue going forward, not just in the process of developing the plan. So just an overview of what we've been working on since September. We had a pop-up meeting at the Peace Neighborhood Family Night. The purpose of that was really to reach participants who hadn't been aware or engaged in the process to date. The attendance was not as good as we had hoped. We had 10 participants. We reached people from 4 different zip codes. But it was something that we want to keep trying, because we don't want to just have the engagement efforts downtown and kind of ask people to come to us. So we're still going to be looking for opportunities to go into events that are happening in the neighborhoods and reach different populations. We also posted a bike-focused survey. Hopefully you all had seen it. We got this, so the nature of the survey was to ask people how comfortable they are riding a bike in general, how frequently they ride a bike, and then look through a series of photos with and without bike facilities to tell us how comfortable that particular roadway would be. So we got an amazing number of responses, over 1,000 responses. I would just take this opportunity to generally say that the engagement in Ann Arbor has been incredible, and I know you guys are used to it, but from my perspective, coming from working in various cities across the Midwest and across the country, we have to really fight tooth and nail to get the kind of numbers that you get in a day putting a survey up online here in Ann Arbor. So it's really amazing. Our first survey had 1,800 responses in a week, which is just incredible. But getting back to this survey, we found that of the people who answered the survey, 61% ride a bike a few times a week, and 25% occasionally do, a few times a month. And so obviously this survey is probably a little bit self-selecting. You might be more interested in the survey in the first place if you ride a bike. So we keep that in mind, but it is telling that the community at large in Ann Arbor is more active in riding a bike than a lot of others we work in. But even with that said, almost 80% said they would ride a bike more if they felt safer and more comfortable on roadways, which is pretty high considering how many people are already biking a lot. And that 65% are comfortable riding on streets but would prefer a designated facility like a bike lane. And then of the images we showed, these are the two that rose to the top in terms of people's level of comfort being on those facilities. So fairly low traffic residential street that still had a designated space for bikes, and a higher traffic street but with a separated facility. And then I just wanted to give an overview of what we did tonight, although a lot of you did see it in person, which was great. We had a handout with the values overview, which was basically reporting back to people about from the first open house. We had asked people about their values, and then we further refined those with staff and the 2 committees. And so we have kind of I won't call it final because things can always change through this process, but we have the working definition of those values, which you'll see throughout this presentation as well. We also had a station that focused on the low-stress bike network and how should we be building that out. So we asked people to draw on the map and also give us priorities of streets that should be prioritized for those comfortable bike facilities. And then we had a series of corridors that we're focusing on as we move forward, and asked people to prioritize the different modes of transportation and that they would like to see prioritized on those streets. So this was a really fun activity that drew a lot of engagement, and people were really excited about it. So it was great to see. I'll report on the findings next time, and probably in between as well. So I also just wanted to go over fairly briefly our Mobility in Ann Arbor Today fact book. This is on the website as of today, so you guys can go download that and peruse it in more detail. But just pulled out some one kind of fact per value that we're focusing on. So I believe that I went through the values last time as well, where we landed on 5 values for the plan. First one is safety, the value statement being Ann Arbor is a safe city where everyone participates in creating an environment in which people feel confident and comfortable traveling. We did not organize this existing conditions review based on the values because we were kind of defining those as we were doing this analysis, but everything that we did look at fits into one of these values. So just wanted to, that's how this is organized, but you'll notice that this fact book is organized slightly differently. So Ann Arbor is a relatively safe city compared to other cities, but Vision Zero is the goal of that nobody should die or be severely injured on our streets, right? So we took a look at what is happening on our streets today, where are there more crashes, and who is that affecting more. The second value that we've come up with is mobility, that Ann Arbor prioritizes moving people and goods efficiently, making it easier for people to choose sustainable modes of transportation, which has been a theme even tonight. And some of the trends that we're finding are that people are increasingly choosing more modes, and the city wants to encourage that and see that trend continue on this path. The third value is accessibility, that in Ann Arbor, people of all abilities, ages, stages of life, income, and races and ethnicities have equitable access to the places where they live, work, and play. And part of what we looked at that's relevant here is access to jobs by different modes of transportation. So you'll see that people driving have access to a staggering amount of jobs compared to people taking transit, people biking. We also separated people biking on all streets versus people biking on those low-stress streets to kind of understand what it's like for somebody who's not comfortable on any street.
Sorry, can you just clarify from where? What, like 20 minutes from?
So this was kind of an array of the whole city, so it's only looking at within the city residents, where can they get to and from? So no matter where you live, well, as an aggregate.
Thank you.
Yeah. And then walking, obviously, you would expect that to be a lot lower as a slower mode of transportation. The fourth value being healthy people, sustainable places. The Ann Arbor's transportation system supports a healthy population, sustainable environment, and robust economy while celebrating and enhancing a unique quality of place. We did look at some health metrics as we could. This one is showing greenhouse gas emissions, and the trends in greenhouse gas emissions have been going down in Ann Arbor. The portion of that that comes from transportation has been staying steady. So that might be an opportunity moving forward. And then the final value being regional connectivity. Ann Arbor works to expand travel options throughout the region and integrate its transportation system with wider regional networks. And one of the things that we looked at that's relevant here is just understanding where people are coming from now for commuting to work. So these arrows are proportionate to the influx of people commuting to work. And then on the left, you see how many people are coming in to Ann Arbor from outside for work versus staying within the city versus living in the city and going out. I don't have a slide on it, but one other thing that I wanted to point out is that equity is not expressly a value that's on its own. We felt that equity should be kind of built in throughout the plan. So you'll see some things on equity in the fact book. And moving forward, the recommendations will be organized by these values. And just wanted to point out that equity would then be carried throughout those. And then in terms of next steps, we plan to replicate the open house corridor-focused activity that we did tonight online. Because we get 1,800 people to respond online, we didn't want to lose that opportunity to get that kind of input on those corridors. And then another thing that we're starting to work on is developing strategies. We got some input from the Community Advisory Committee last time on those, so we'll be working through those and vetting those back through the TAC, while at the same time starting to delve into those focus corridors. So I think that's all I had. Any questions?
Yes.
Sorry, I have a lot of questions tonight. Thank you, this was really interesting. Can you go back to the inflow, outflow image? So am I interpreting this correctly, that twice as many workers come into the city every day as the total number of workers who live in Ann Arbor, both commuting within the city and commuting out of Ann Arbor? Am I doing that?
Yes, I think so.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. It's big, and it puts a strain on your transportation system.
Jim?
Okay, am I using this right? I can't tell.
Yes.
Okay. So I don't know exactly how to do this, but in the messaging, is there any way to tie ethics to this? Like if there's an accident, right, it's not just an accident, I should say crash, that it's a kind of an ethical failure of the system, not just that it happened, we're doing the best we can, oh well. Or incentivizing, different forms of transportation through some type of ethical message. And I don't see that well, I see it in European stuff like this, but I haven't seen it in the United States anywhere.
So I think that I think that there is an ethics question built into, or statement, I should say, built into the policy of Vision Zero, because the whole point of that is stating that we don't think it's acceptable, and we're going to do everything in our power to change that. And I do think that it is important for that to be stated from the highest level of an organization, of a government, and that it not just be a statement that that it follows through with the policies and procedures and operations of the organization.
Right. Which is great, yeah, I guess that wasn't really what I meant kind of like on an individual.
Now you turned your mic off. Push the button.
Oh.
Yes.
Okay, so on on an individual basis, the people that you're reaching, it's not just that, okay, the organization has this vision and this ethic, but somehow whoever you're sending that message to feel that, personalize it. Right? So maybe people who mainly drive cars, you know, if someone hits a cyclist and a pedestrian, all of that weight should be on the operator of the vehicle and not, you know, ethically on the operator of the vehicle and not someone who's operating a 20-pound device while walking on the street. So, like I said, I don't know how to do that, but we see it in European where the individual feels they all have a responsibility, not just coming from the organization
Yeah.
that's trying to push it
Yeah.
upon everyone.
Yeah, and if you have specific ideas of how to build that in, I'm certainly open and
Okay.
would encourage that. Some of the things I have seen around that issue are creating pledges and having, goals of how many people sign that pledge. And that's one way of kind of transferring that ethical question onto the general public. I think it's also a question of bringing in all the departments too, and bringing the media along. And so it's a very multidisciplinary effort.
Other questions or discussion?
I have a question.
Yes.
When you had your slide about bringing in the various other, I know you said the police, you said the city. Did you want to include school system in that as well? Or are you including them anyway?
Yes, we are. I think that slide was just language from the Vision Zero Network.
Okay, great. Because, we just had this presentation, and certainly there's a role for everyone, particularly as I'm thinking about accidents that can happen in school zones or among our, younger teenagers that are just starting to drive
Yeah.
and, those kinds of things, just
Yeah.
how to help them to be careful.
Yeah, and we've talked about having a call with driving schools specifically. And actually, I owe Liz a call or an email. We're trying to coordinate a school-based outreach.
Okay, thank you.
Howard?
So we just had a presentation from university. We're not going to be successful if they're not engaged. So when we talk about a driving ethic, when I walk into work, at the times I almost get hit by cars driving to the hospital. So while they're a good partner, that partnership needs to extend into their practice. And you see how much parking they have. And parking is something that drives a lot of their decisions as it does ours. So when we talk about an ethic, there's got to be a consideration and a messaging that goes far beyond just us. When you look at that chart of 84,000 people who come in, a large part of that, when you talk about 47,000 faculty, so they've got to be intrinsically involved in all of this. It's got to be their plan as much as it's our plan. So
Yes.
outreach to the university, not just at the institutional level, but at a very personal level with both faculty and students has got to be part of our outreach and our planning.
Steve?
Looking at the slide on safety, the bar graph, and it just struck me, I never really thought about this before. But Vision Zero, it seems like a lot of the effort that's going on and continuing to take place, which I totally agree with, by the way, is around biking and pedestrian facilities. And if you look at taking the biggest chunk out of this, it's vehicles that are having the most injuries and deaths. So I just point that out. It's, I guess, I don't know that it makes sense. It struck me when I looked at this data. The other thing was the people in crosswalks, or the the pedestrian injuries in 2009. And I know we didn't go any further beyond this, and it might be just, a rare instance, but I can't remember the crosswalk law that changed in Ann Arbor. Was it 2010?
I don't remember.
That was my recollection. And then I just look at what happened from 2009 to 2010 to the number of pedestrian injuries. Just a weird correlation. I never thought of it until I just looked at this. So I think it's something that needs to be considered when you talk about people being potentially hit by vehicles. Are we doing it the right way?
Well, and I think you do make a good point about people driving. I think Vision Zero is meant to be inclusive of anybody getting killed or seriously injured on streets. And, but often what that comes down to is if you make the streets safe for people, the most vulnerable, you make it safer for people driving as well. And speeds have a lot to do with probably the majority of all of these crashes, no matter what mode you are using.
Other comments, questions? All right.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for sticking around and
You're welcome.
keeping us up to date. And we have one more presentation yet. But Raymond's been known for being quick and to the point. Talking about crosswalk prioritization.
All right. All right. Madam Chair, members of the commission, Raymond Hess here to talk to you tonight about our first crack at a crosswalk prioritization process. Just for a little bit of quick background, I think many of you have been following this development, but based on some direction from council, we've been inventorying our system, kind of identifying what it would take to bring our system up to snuff with our crosswalk design guidelines. And so now that we've kind of done a lot of that foundational work, we wanted to identify a system whereby we can prioritize which crosswalks are in the most need and which ones we should focus on first. And so you'll note that a lot of what I'm going to present will look very familiar to a presentation you received last week, including this interesting goth background, which is related to the sidewalk prioritization process. So what we did is we adapted the sidewalk prioritization process, sidewalk gap prioritization process for crosswalks because a lot of the same considerations seemed applicable. So with that, obviously we want to make sure that we're looking at this through a lens of complete streets related to the non-motorized plan and the direction we're going with Vision Zero, and making sure that we're addressing challenges as our city continues to grow and we're trying to, manage many different competing interests in the public right-of-way. The crosswalk evaluation that we talked about is really pegged to that crosswalk design guideline. We presented that, I believe, earlier this year. Got your feedback on that, and it really helped us identify, what those target designs are for the different types of crosswalks we have, based on, what type of roadway they're on, whether it's a controlled intersection or an uncontrolled intersection or uncontrolled crosswalk, and so really this is kind of the driving force behind all of this work. Just to give you an idea of kind of the magnitude of what we're looking at, we currently have 221 existing marked crosswalks. Again, these are on major roads. These are not necessarily all the little local crosswalks on local streets. 26, are identified below the target design level pursuant to our crosswalk design guidelines. And we have updated the cost to upgrade the remaining crosswalks somewhere between $300,000 and $1.2 million. That's a pretty big range. The reason for that, if you may recall, the exercise we went through to identify those crosswalk design targets, there's a bit of a menu approach. So if you get the the overhead rectangular rapid flashing beacon sign that's on the mast arm, that's like an $80,000 treatment. But then, sometimes a treatment can go all the way down to just a couple $1,000s if we're talking about, just pavement markings. So there's kind of this whole spectrum in between of crosswalk improvements that are part of this calculation. And as a result, there's kind of a wide range related to that work. This number is higher than what you've seen in the past because you may recall the first crack that we had at this, there were a lot of kind of to be determines, data insufficient. And so we've actually been spending the last several months going through and filling in as many of those blanks as possible. And we feel good about where we're at in that process. It's still a higher level planning exercise, but we think it's a good estimation of what the needs are in the system. The other thing too is, the reason for, or the need for this is, there is a limited budget, both in terms of, financial assets, but then also just internal staff capacity. We can't just snap our fingers and bring everything up to snuff. We try to do as much as we possibly can. And so we want a system that really can help us guide where those investments should be made. And ultimately what the last bullet point talks to is we want to take out some of the subjectivity of, from our perspective, and really see if we can rely on existing data sources to kind of automate the process. So how can we rely on our GIS system to help identify where those needs are? So the specific criteria, bless you, related to the crosswalk prioritization, again, will look very similar to the sidewalk gap. So proximity to pedestrian attractors such as schools, transit stops, affordable housing, and other attractors like parks. What are the crash patterns at that location, and which ones involve pedestrians? And if we can discern too, if it's a result of the lack of, crosswalk amenities, it really is powerful for us to determine the need there. The road classification, is it a big wide arterial or is it a local narrow neighborhood street? What requests have we received, and is it identified in the non-motorized plan? We did add some weighting consistent with the consistent with the sidewalk gap prioritization process. So we wanted to, again, be as consistent as possible. And again, the idea here is to create kind of the future plan. You may recall, again, earlier this year when we identified which improvements we were going to make in 2019, which are reported in your packet on a monthly basis, this was absent this information in the past. A lot of this was really request-driven, and while requests are very important, we want to make sure that we're also taking into account some other data points as well. So, again, that's what this is hopefully going to do, is help us develop game plans and work plans for 2020 and beyond. The other thing to note is all of our crosswalks that we are working on, we do put in requests to DTE for positive contrast lighting. There is oftentimes a mismatch in terms of when the crosswalk improvement is completed versus when the DTE lighting goes in. A good example are, the new rectangular rapid flashing beacons that we have on North Maple. The RFBs are up, the crosswalks are in, but the lighting has not yet been installed by DTE. But we've had that request in with DTE for several months, so they're playing catch up as well. The evidence of community support, again, is something that, when we talked to you last month about the sidewalk gaps, it's something that some of it we can capture based on data we have, whether we've gotten requests, and some of it was what the desire lines are. We had a discussion last month about the term goat paths and changing that out for desire lines, you may recall. So just to show you what this looks like, what you see side by side is the sidewalk weighting versus the crosswalk weighting, and we want to make it as consistent as possible. So we have evidence of community support, proximity to schools, pedestrian auto crashes, proximity to transit, proximity to affordable housing, proximity to other attractors, classification of the adjacent road. The near-term opportunities in the non-motorized plan. Then the two things that were taken out were city-owned parcels and gap length. These don't really apply to crosswalks, right? Crosswalk, it doesn't matter if there's an adjacent city parcel. It makes a difference if you're filling a sidewalk gap because you don't have to assess a property owner. But with a crosswalk, it's irrelevant. So you'll see that there's no weight. That's pretty much eliminated from the crosswalk. And then the same thing with gap length, right? I mean, the idea here was under sidewalks, if you have a longer gap or a shorter gap, that has different weights, where here a crosswalk doesn't really matter how wide the crosswalk has to be to get across the road. If it's of importance, then it needs to be done.
I feel like there is kind of an analogous thing for gap lengths that's a bit different for crosswalks, which would be the gap between crosswalks. If there's an area with a longer stretch without a crosswalk, I feel like that would be higher priority.
That's a great suggestion, actually. I think that's something for us to go back and consider and to factor in, because that is something we've heard. Actually, in some of the analyses that was done by the Sam Schwartz team, they had looked at, in the downtown area and in certain areas, we have kind of crosswalks at very kind of close proximity, but then along some of our other corridors, it may be half a mile or upwards of a mile before you get to crosswalks. So I think that's great input. And I believe that was my last slide. Oh, no, next steps. So we're here tonight just to kind of see if we're headed in the right direction with this. What we wanted to do is, once we have a chance to kind of vet it with you all, kind of run it through the process to see how things shake out, if it kind of goes in a way that is, to be not expected, but in a way that makes logical sense, and then ultimately develop the work plan for the next calendar year and next construction cycle. So I appreciate Commissioner Hull's recommendation. I think that's something we definitely should factor into the matrix and put it back into the consideration. I think that's a good one.
I have a question. Can you go back to that slide again where you just, yep, right here.
And Commissioner Woods, if I may just real quickly, I do note that the actual weighting scores there, I'll have to double check to make sure that those reflect the sidewalk gap weighting scores, because that's probably the one thing that I think might be, wasn't correctly updated in the slide now that I look at it more closely. So we will make sure it's consistent with the latest version of the sidewalk gap. Sorry if I cut you off there. I know that may have not been your question, but.
No, that's fine to give us that explanation. I was just thinking in terms of new construction. Is that somehow taken into consideration? I'm thinking about, for example, if there's going to be a new multi-story building or something, and there will be people living in there that will need to cross where perhaps a crosswalk does not exist at this point, or something.
Sure, so
Is
like
that
adjacent private development.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think admittedly, I don't think it's captured right now. You can see right here that we have these other attractors, and they are spelled out down here: library, government offices, major commercial attractors or parks. So I guess if there is a commercial component, it probably could be captured under this proximity to other attractors. But I think to your point, if there's a certain density of multifamily residential, that may make sense. I'd love your input on that, especially as a planning commission liaison to this group. I think that might be something we can enter into the other attractors space.
Okay, yeah, because it could be residential, but may not be affordable housing, so.
Right.
And I don't know if it would necessarily be commercial, so.
Right.
Okay. Then the other question I have is back to your slide where you were telling us the approximation about how much it might cost.
Sure.
So you're right, 300,000 to $1,027,000, that's a
Just a $1
big
million
gap.
delta, right?
Yeah. But it's not a lot of money in the long run, so why can't we do it sooner?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I think what we're trying to do is, we've had certain allocations from City Council that we've been very bullish about making sure we put that money to good use and are out there making improvements to crosswalks and throughout the system. So even some of the things that Liz reported on earlier about the school crossing zone signs, those are some of the things that, through the preparation of the budget by Howard and what was approved by council, we're trying to get as much of this done as possible. So ultimately, again, it's a question of, the budgetary capacity and also our capacity to implement based, on how much bandwidth we have at a staff level and whether we can supplement that with, external forces. That's something that can always be considered as well. But right now, we're trying to make the best use of the funding that's been budgeted in the actual city budget.
Okay. And so are some of these things also dependent upon the weather or time of year and things like that, construction?
Some are, yeah. Some of the signage we can put in year-round, including the rectangular rapid flashing beacons. We're actually hoping to get some put in this winter. Pavement marking tends to be a little dicey if the weather's inclement, especially if it's like thermoplastic where you actually have to melt it down. We actually were all caught off guard a week and a half ago when the big snow event happened, because there was a lot of pavement
Right.
striping that was still supposed to occur. So you'll probably notice, Hill and Green is not yet striped. Traverwood is not yet striped. We wanted to do some restriping on Division that isn't yet done, and all of that's been put on hold because there was still ice on the road up till today. Hopefully the rain later on this week will rinse that off, and then we might have a clean slate to work with. But yeah, long story short, during the winter months, sometimes it's very difficult to do certain improvements.
Okay. And do you take up those things in the middle of the street when the weather gets really bad, or are they just getting knocked down?
We do, yeah. They actually probably were pulled this week. I was talking to some of my staff members, and I think yesterday was the day that they were going to pull those. It is, this is one of those trade-offs that we know that those in-road signs, what we call the R1-6s, are very effective. But at the same time, we also know the importance of making sure that the bike lanes and the crosswalks are plowed in the winter months. And when those things are in the middle of the road, it really presents challenge. You even saw it last Monday, right? The plows were going around them, so you would see this little island of snow in the middle of the road, and you would see these like curbside parts that weren't plowed either adjacent to those signs. So it's been a challenge for us to kind of figure out a year-round solution that could work with those in-road signs, and we haven't really solved that problem yet.
Does that mean that perhaps the big ones with the arms coming over the street might even be more helpful in bad weather like what we have?
Yeah, so the crosswalk design guideline helps us identify which of those treatments is most appropriate. So the overhead with the arms and the signs, those tend to be on the multi-lane kind of arterial roads. So the most recent one we built was in front of Pioneer High School on Stadium. And so if you think about the characteristic of that roadway, 2 lanes in each direction, it's posted at 35 miles per hour. You have a heavy pedestrian attractor with the high school there, and the stadium itself, right, kitty corner to it. So that deserves kind of the highest treatment we have. When we start looking at other roadways that are either less traffic, narrower in scope, the overhead, while may be effective, probably is not necessarily the most appropriate treatment given the budgets that we have and our capacity to implement and keep those up.
Yeah. I go up and down Liberty, and particularly there along 7th, where they really do slow down the traffic.
Yeah.
And this time of year when children are all bundled up trying to get across the street for school and things like that, it's almost like a lot of different factors are coming together in one spot. While I know it means people driving cars have to be even more careful while they're driving because you don't want to hit those things as well.
Right.
It does become problematic, and I just hope it's going to be okay.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
okay,
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? All right, then. You're on again for the transportation update. If there's anything that you need to add or point us to. Transitioning back and forth.
Yes, Madam Chair, so I know we are running over. So in the interest of time, what I'll do, if it's okay with the commission, is just highlight the projects that have substantive changes without going into what those changes are.
Yes.
I'll gladly go into more detail if you wish, but, Fifth Avenue was identified, the annual sidewalk repair program, there are changes there. Under the crosswalk improvements, you may recall last month I wasn't able to capture the October update just based on how this commission meets in relation to city council. So this includes the October and the November update. So there's a lot of update in the crosswalk improvement section. Sorry, my screen is scrolling. Hoover Hill and Green is now complete substantially. North 7th Street has a updated timeline, and Ashley parking structure is updated. Ann Arbor Station has some new language on it as well. Lower Town Mobility Study has some new language. One thing I will note is we did reorganize the report a little bit and kind of moved some things around, so apologies if you compare month to month. We tried to, for example, reorganize things related to the MDOT coordination and break it out in a more logical fashion. So the information is consistent, but it's just reorganized a little bit.
And now alphabetical order within the categories to help you find topics.
I'll let you guess whose idea that was. There's a little bit of information about public outreach campaigns. There are some new projects identified in the traffic calming list. We have new petitions that have come in. The transportation plan update references a lot of what you heard tonight, but there's updated language there as well. And I think that concludes the projects that have substantive changes to them.
Whew, all right. Any comments or questions on that? All right, seeing none. Our next item is just kind of a housekeeping item. We have a tiny change to our charter that, the ordinance that we'd like to have us approve that makes it easier for AAATA to work out who's going to be the representative on the commission.
And
make it all
this
legal.
doesn't require any commission action. City council will consider it at their or the first reading will be at the December 2nd city council meeting.
So we don't,
have to take action on this.
Okay.
And that's consistent with how we handled previous ordinance amendment. It's more a technicality of just ensuring that AATA has the flexibility due to their staff scheduling
great.
to have delegates, so.
So now you know that we have that change to our ordinance.
One comment, I'm just wondering why this was just done for AAATA and not as a general thing for the liaison positions. It just seems like, because I know we've had like frequently, like the city council appointed liaison isn't able to attend and other liaisons aren't able to attend, and I'm wondering if like other bodies would benefit from the same flexibility.
I think that's something we could take back and discuss with the attorney's office and see whether that flexibility is available. I know with AATA specifically, it was because it's staff of that organization that they have had some conflicts, I think, with who was available different times due to other overlapping meetings and things like that.
Doesn't the same thing apply to AAPS, the schools?
So APS is a non-voting position. So they could send a delegate and it wouldn't be an ordinance conflict. The issue was that ATA holds a voting position on the commission.
Okay, so Kayla suggested that action.
Yeah, I can take that back and look for some feedback for other liaisons. Howard?
I will just tell you, I'm not going to support it. This was an exception. I think this is a commitment of an organization, an individual, and you want to avoid a revolving door. Just a personal feeling towards the matter. So while AAATA may have some unique characteristics, I think generally it's bad practice.
Okay. This is definitely not the time to debate it, but it's good to know that we could have some future discussion. Okay. Speaking of liaisons, then we have liaison reports from those people who are designated liaisons. Anybody need to speak up? We've sort of heard from most of them,
Yeah.
but the
I'll just-
disability committee?
Say that we've been discussing the HB 4738 as well, and actually just had some discussions with both Erica Briggs and Councilmember Griswold, and Erica came to speak to us today, and we've had discussions about like what stance we want to do and if we want to like support changes such as the thing including the curb, and it's going to come back to us in December, for a December meeting, which is before this one on the same day. And also, yeah, I'll mention, I guess I'm not an official liaison on this, but I've just heard news with respect to the RTA that they're apparently working on state legislative changes that will allow them to put forward a regional transit millage with like Wayne, Washtenaw, and Oakland counties, well, excluding Macomb. But I just thought that was notable, and we'll probably hear more about that when they begin the outreach program. And I'm on the Citizens Advisory Committee for that, and I'm assuming we might hear more about that in that meeting.
All right. It excludes Macomb County for that, yeah. Any other liaisons, I think, okay. Any individual commission member communications? All right, then we move to next agenda items. Yes.
I had one. So with the city council declaring the climate emergency and a very ambitious goal of 2030 carbon neutrality, and 17% of our greenhouse gases are due to transportation. So it seems like it would be useful for us to discuss that, and I wondered if we could ask one of the city's sustainability people to come present to us.
Okay. Any,
And we're on for December 18th. I've reached out to them.
Oh,
Thank you,
perfect.
Julie, for giving me a heads up that you're going to ask. And I've heard back from the Sustainability Office. They will plan to attend. Someone from the office will be here for our next meeting.
great, and if there's any particular outcome that you want from that, it'd be great to communicate that in advance. I guess the only other thing was that we did receive a written communication as part of public comment about scooters, and that was a letter to the commission, and we haven't exactly established a process for how people get responded to or what we do with that. And that letter was included in your packet, but it may have been a little obscure because it was an attachment to public commentary, which you're not used to.
Right. And that, I've handled it that way a couple of times in the past, and we can talk about if there's a different way, maybe Linda and Diane and I, on our next agenda call, if there's a different way you'd prefer to handle comments that come into the commission. I've been posting as public comment, though electronic public comment to the commission.
But how to respond to that type of communication is also of a question, so I think we could have an agenda item that says, do you want a letter from the chair, a letter from Kayla? What should we do?
Yes, we can talk about that in general, and then I think Raymond wants to comment on that specific.
Yeah, I just wanted to make one note that if any of you field any questions or comments about scooters, especially if they're kind of improperly parked or kind of abandoned, I would encourage you to direct them towards the A2 Fix-It app that we use. And one of the reasons why is we're really trying to quantify what the issues are. And the nice thing about the A2 Fix-It app is there is an abandoned scooters tab. It's one of the categories you can select, just like you can report a streetlight outage or a pothole or whatever the case may be. So, if people can tell, when they report it, they give us a location, they give us a time, they give us the details we need to help us kind of quantify what the issues are. And so I fielded several communications from different members of the public, and I've always encouraged them, in order for us to know what the problems are and to be able to address those long-term, I need to know the details surrounding what the concerns are. So that's something if you field any of those, you can direct people towards that.
Okay.
And what I thought Raymond was going to say was that the specific public comment that what you received tonight as an agenda attachment, Raymond also responded to that individual with a staff response. And so I let them know, I responded to Michael Kim that I would provide this information to the Transportation Commission, and then separately staff followed up regarding his concerns. So it's not that the communication has gone unanswered.
Great, so we just need to know that too
Yeah.
then.
Mhm.
Any other agenda items? You can always suggest them later on.
Just a question.
Yes.
In terms of the scooters, because this was something that came up in Planning Commission a couple of years ago. Do you know, and I admit I haven't looked yet to see, do we have any sort of information on the city website about operating scooters in Ann Arbor? And might that be helpful? Because we do get, that population that's coming in
Sure.
every year.
Yeah,
We want to know.
that's a great suggestion. I don't believe we do have any informational materials on the, and just for distinction too, when I'm speaking about e-scooters right now, I'm speaking about the little spin scooters as opposed to like a moped.
Uh-huh.
But no, I don't believe we have any materials on the city website. I know with Spin, we can work with them on particular safety messaging related to the app. When you actually check out the scooter, it can push information out through that channel. So we have a couple opportunities to push out safety messaging.
Okay. I think it might be helpful even for our citizens in the city who will want to know, if we see these scooters lying around, what am I supposed to do? Or where are they okay on sidewalks? Should they only be in streets? Should
Right.
you have a helmet?
So, and that
You
can be
know.
included in the committee's recommendations, which have been stalled because of the city attorney issues.
Oh, okay.
So I think
And
Kayla can make a note of that and
Yeah,
mention
I
it
think
to the
that's a
committee
great
members.
suggestion. I just spoke with John Fournier today about getting the band back together for the micromobility task force. We have a couple things that we've been kind of following, and so I think it might be a good point in time for us to kind of, take that recommendation as a good one, see what the scooter usage trends have been. We are getting reports from Spin about, what those trends are. We can look to how many A2 Fix-It, C-Click Fix requests have come in as well. And then quite frankly, we're going to be coming up on the 1-year anniversary, and it's probably a good time for us to figure out if we need to tweak anything related to their operation in the community.
So I don't really want to evolve into a discussion about scooters right now.
I
but
just
as a-
had one point about scooters that I thought might be worth investigating. When I looked at them, it said that you required a driver's license. Does the state law require a driver's license, or is that the operator? Because if it's the operator that's requiring it, I think that when we go to negotiate the new contracts, we should try to negotiate a contract that does not have that requirement in it.
I can jump in here, Raymond. It is not a motor vehicle by definition, so it should not require a driver's license.
Yeah, I do believe Spin requires it though, so I think it would be good if we were.
So particularly if the committee is going to be reconstituted, then let's refer these all to the committee and not do any committee work right now at 9:20.
So I'll just, to keep us moving on the next agenda, we have the 2020 work plan, should come before you next month, as well as the 2019 annual report. So we've been compiling that, following the same format that we used for the 2017 and 18 combined report that we did last year. And so I'll talk with you, Linda, Diane, but we may want to ask for some volunteers. I think last time we had a couple of select quotes from commissioners to pull in some additional anecdotes in that report. But now's the time. We're getting close to when
My
we should be
goodness, okay.
wrapping that up. So
Any
The-
other agenda item things, you can direct them to Kayla in between the meetings. The agenda setting is the first Friday of the month, so that's when we'd like to hear from you about that. Our next meeting is Wednesday, December 18th at 7 PM here on the second floor of this council chambers of the City Hall. And if there are no objections, then I'll adjourn the meeting. It's adjourned.